You either loved or hated the original,
Send bachelors and come heavily armed.
and you probably felt the same way about the sequel.
This is a failed short session.
So now it's time to complete the trilogy. That's right, we're talking Cap and Trade 3.0. But this time, Republicans aren't going to get the chance to walk out.
I'm using the tool that I told the legislature and I told the Oregonians I would use, and that is well within my executive authority.
Speaking of Kate Brown, she's apparently the least popular governor in America right now. And frankly, she doesn't care. Plus, remember the woman who said she had to move because of the tear gas Portland police used almost nightly during last year's protests? Well, now she's suing the city. Here's the story.
Hey everybody, I'm Maggie Vespa. Welcome to The Story. As you can tell, we have a packed show. We have all those things that you just saw in our big fancy open, and we also have more weird holiday decor. Let's get this out of the way really quick. We asked you to send in your strangest holiday decorations, and people, the madness continues. I think our super might be blocking a little bit of that photo there, but you can see, there it goes. This is part 3 of Kristen's holiday skeletons, and they watched themselves on TV last night. Isn't that lovely? Kristen tweeted, "Skeletons are kind of our thing." We've noticed. You know, as they should be, Kristen. That is fantastic. Happy holidays to Kristen and to all, frankly, the proud weirdos out there. This is your show. We identify with you, Dagnabbit, and we appreciate you sending in all these photos. Contact info, by the way, is at the bottom of your screen for your questions, your comments, and again, your weird holiday decor. You can email thestory@kgw.com. You can use the hashtag #TheStoryKGW. We'll have more of that later on in the show. But for now, let's get to the big story. Tonight's big story, Cap and Trade 3.0. And yes, you heard that right. The governor is bringing it back, but this time the legislature won't have anything to do with it. So first, there's a big backstory here. So let's catch you up, get you up to speed on just how divisive this issue has been in Oregon for years.
Oregon lawmakers have been trying to pass a cap and trade bill for almost 15 years. So how did we get here? The first one in 2007 was actually sponsored by both a Democrat and a Republican, but it failed. Cap and trade again failed in 2009, and other versions of the program have failed every year since 2015. In 2019, it seemed like the Democrats' supermajority would be enough to get it passed, but Republicans had a Hail Mary, beating the system by walking out and stopping a vote. Governor Kate Brown sent the state police to bring them back, but at least some senators left the state, so police couldn't get them. Republicans eventually came back on their own when Democrats announced they no longer had the votes needed to pass cap and trade. So last year, they tried again with a new bill that Democrats said would be better for rural Oregonians. But once again, as expected, Republicans left. This time, Democrats didn't send police after them. They just let the clock run out, then ended the session early.
The House is adjourned.
Now, Governor Brown is following through with her promise to take executive action during her last year in office. And that's how we got here.
Okay, so now we're caught up. So what exactly is that executive action again? Well, next week, a group called the Environmental Quality Commission is expected to approve the latest attempt to slash greenhouse gases. And members of that commission were appointed by the governor. So Pat Doris talked with her about the plan, and he has a look at what it'll mean for businesses, also likely for you, the consumer.
The new plan to attack greenhouse gases is called the Climate Protection Program. It's a sweeping set of new rules that would require everyone from Intel to Northwest Natural Gas to the company you buy gasoline from and many others to cut their greenhouse emissions significantly. And yes, it will probably cost you money when the companies pass at least part of the cost on to consumers. This chart shows the reduction path, starting with the company's average pollution level from 2017 through 2019, then requiring the company to cut that amount in half by 2035, just 14 years from now, and by 90% by the year 2050.
It's so important that we do this because we can meet our climate goals and create clean energy jobs and grow our economy at the same time.
Governor Kate Brown, just back from the International Global Warming meeting in Scotland, told me it is urgent.
So it's critically important that we take action, and the climate protection program can result in dramatic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions throughout Oregon.
Exactly how that would happen is complicated. There will be reports and studies required and ways to avoid fines. You can read the program for yourself on the Commission's website. You might want to bring some coffee. It's 364 pages long.
It does reduce carbon emissions over time through a regulatory mechanism. We had over 7,000 comments on these rules. We had a very robust public process. Obviously, this was building on the work that was done in the legislature on the cap and invest legislation. And we anticipate, assuming the Environmental Quality Commission approves these rules, we anticipate a 2022 start date.
Okay. And is there really any doubt? Don't you appoint all the members of that commission?
I do, but they are doing their homework. They will certainly listen and review the public record and make their own decisions.
But it will be much easier to get the 5 members of the commission to support the program than it was 90 lawmakers. And just a political question, I can hear folks from the rural communities, maybe from the right, saying that we have a legislative process, we have a way for this to work its way through the representatives of the people, and that by doing the rulemaking, you're doing an end around to get what you want.
Well, I would just say we had an opportunity. We had 2 sessions where we had robust conversations on the cap and invest legislation that would created a fund to make specific investments in our rural communities, our communities of color and low-income communities. It was Republicans who walked off the job during that process. So I am using the tool that I told the legislature and I told Oregonians I would use, and that is well within my executive authority.
Okay, KGW's Pat Doris joining us now. So Pat, Governor Brown clearly not mincing words there. You talked about people who will disagree with what she wants to do. What are you hearing from the opposition?
Well, Oregon's largest business organized group is called Oregon Business Industry, and they do not like this at all. They put in multi-page protest at the end of the review process, and they're saying that, look, the state says this will have a slightly positive economic impact. And in fact, their experts say it's just the opposite, that it'll be like a $10 billion body blow. So they're quite concerned, and they're trying to keep this from happening. But there is a lot of momentum behind it, and I think it's a good bet it's going to go. All
right. Pat Doris with the insight from Governor Brown there. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Let's keep this chat with Governor Brown going, but a warning, things are about to get a little spicy. You see, that interview that you just saw between Pat and Governor Brown, that happened last week, and Pat got 45 minutes with the governor. They talked about several different topics, and among them, as you heard alluded to in that piece, she had a recent trip to a UN climate conference in Scotland, where the governor said this about having dinner with that country's first minister.
She's like the governor or the president of Scotland. She's a total and complete badass. And she is so committed to moving.
We never heard her say that before. I just wanted to point that out. She even made Pat giggle. Keep in mind, Pat's heard that language before. The guy works in a newsroom. But, you know, frankly, we appreciate the governor's candid comments. We love it when any elected official gives their unfiltered take. It's refreshing, it's honest, and we know you, the constituents, appreciate it too when they just kind of get real with us. Well, hang on to your hats, refreshed, grateful constituents, because we would like to point you to a Willamette Week piece that we think is worth your time. The headline, a very Kate Brown Christmas. Oregonians are shunning America's least popular governor. Is she really so bad? In that piece, Willamette Week highlights a study from a national polling firm, Morning Consult. They ranked governors by approval ratings, and Kate Brown came in dead last, 50th out of 50. Cut to this article. Willamette Week asked Governor Brown about that ranking, about coming in last place. And this is where we remind you why we played that candid, shall we say, slightly blue soundbite at the top, because the Willamette Week reported, quote, in a brief interview, Governor Brown attributes her unfavorable ratings to her efforts to challenge the status quo. Goes on to say, she also blames the media, the Oregonian and Willamette Week in particular, which she says peed all over me for her COVID policies. Wow. If you think that's a lot, stand by for our quote of the day. The governor also said, quote, frankly, I don't give a damn. I want to focus on getting stuff done. I got permission to say that on TV. Governor Brown, copy that, okay? We have made note. And given that you have about a year left in office before your term limits force you to step down, we can't wait to see what happens next. All right, let's go back in time now to summer 2020. We know it's impossible to forget. There were nightly protests and vandalism. There were fights with police in the streets of Portland. All of it came in waves after the murder of George Floyd. And nearly every night for months, Portland police and federal officers deployed tear gas to try and break up the crowds. That summer, Portland police used it more than 100 times. It affected protesters, obviously, but it also affected anyone walking, working, or living nearby. If you've ever experienced tear gas, you know it's no joke. It irritates your eyes, your nose, your skin, your throat. The effects can last for weeks or months, according to the American Lung Association. It can also cause lung problems, and some studies have linked tear gas to brain injuries, loss of limbs, blindness, and mental health problems. On top of that, according to new research from Kaiser, it can also impact a person's menstrual cycle. And that is what Liv Vasquez says happened to her. She wasn't even at the protests. We want to note she was just living her life at her home in Southeast Portland. But she says for months she had major problems with her period, and she blames it on tear gas.
This was early quarantine. I think it's almost hard to remember now, but early in quarantine, everything was closed. We were really only allowed to take a walk around the block as our only outlet for the day, or only fresh air for the day. So I was going out and trying to take my daily walks, and I would get about halfway around the block and literally be doubled over with cramps. Like, it was pretty fast that it would happen, and it was kind of abnormal for me. I had never had cramps like this before. And so I would pretty much just turn around and go right back home. And then I started noticing spotting, which is another thing that I have not really experienced before, especially to this degree. And then, issues with my menstrual cycle started happening.
Now, we first talked to Vasquez about her health problems back in May. Fast forward to now, she is suing the city of Portland, arguing that her symptoms were so severe she had to move miles away.
I love Portland so much, and it felt like all of a sudden I was living in a toxic waste dump. Like, the city that I had put so much love towards was really not the city. It was unrecognizable. And it kind of broke my heart. Like, I've always been a good citizen, and I have always cheered the city on. And this was an assault on all of us. And it wasn't just people who were downtown. It was all of us being affected by this. This is an environmental impact. And this is a city that 6 years ago wouldn't even put salt on the roads because of an environmental impact. And now they're poisoning the entire city weeks at a time for almost 3 months.
So Vasquez's lawyer says he has experts ready to show that tear gas exposure explicitly caused her health issues. They're asking for up to $20,000 in damages, and they also want the city declared negligent in how they used tear gas.
Tear gas is a weapon of war, and it should almost never be used in highly populated areas where people live, where pets live, where there's senior care facilities. And the city of Portland was definitely negligent, if not reckless, in its deployment of tear gas in the summer of 2020. Now, we have seen some corrective action on behalf of the city, but we want a policy that they are not going to continue buying, storing, or using tear gas, except for very special circumstances that we want them to articulate.
So it is worth noting that last August, Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler issued a temporary policy with no clear end date, banning police from using tear gas in most situations. We did reach out to the city, but they declined to comment on pending litigation.
Yes, there have been a lot of earthquakes off the Oregon coast over the past 24 hours. But no, that doesn't mean the big one is about to hit.
They're completely normal events. They're sort of like two conveyor belts going side by side. There's a fault between them.
When the story continues.
Welcome back. Keep sending in your questions and your comments to the story at kgw.com or use the hashtag #TheStoryKGW on Twitter. Let's get to an email we got from Ron. He says, my phone alerted me to at least 5 earthquakes 6 to 7 miles off the coast in the last 11 hours, ranging from 3.5 to 5.5. Any chance you can find one of your experts to comment? Now, I do want to know, we got that email last night. Since then, we've had several more earthquakes. The big number everyone's reporting is 50 in the last 24 hours, more than 50. So here's one of those experts that you asked for, Ron. This is Chief Meteorologist Matt Safino. I mean, the big question, is this something that we should be worried about?
No, and I'll show you why, too,
Good.
because these happen all the time out there.
Okay.
It's really quite amazing how frequently they are. So here's a map showing you where something called hydrophones are. What those are used to measure earthquakes that happen under the ocean or under the seafloor. It's pretty interesting technology because when an earthquake happens on the seafloor, that seismic wave gets converted into an acoustic wave. So these things are literally like microphones hanging down in the ocean that pick up the sound, and you can actually hear them. They've been recorded. Pick up the sound of an earthquake and the seismic waves that come along. And so there's a network of these, and because those waves are super low frequency, they travel really long distances. So these are really efficient at picking up underwater or undersea earthquakes. Now, seismometers on the land can also pick them up too, but not quite as good if they're out there way offshore. So this is how they are detected, first of all. And here's another graphic explaining what I just said. Seismic wave, earthquake sends out that seismic wave. It hits the water. It gets converted into what's called a T, or a tertiary wave, which is basically an acoustic wave. And there's that hydrophone just hanging down there. It's moored to the seafloor, picks that up. That data gets relayed, and we know, hey, there was an earthquake because the hydrophone just picked that up. It's pretty amazing. Now, here's why you don't need to worry about it. I know this map is a little hard to read, but just think about all these little red dots. Each one of those little red dots is an earthquake that's been picked up by this underwater network of hydrophones from 1995 through 2008, I believe. There's literally thousands of them out there. This is that big fault zone, the Juan de Fuca fault zone that's offshore. The Cascadia subduction zone is closer to shore. And in a way, it's comforting to see that there's way more offshore on that fault zone than there are on the Cascadia subduction zone, which is where we expect the big one to occur. Now, I've also talked to some seismologists and geologists who say, you know what, in a way, this is good because those earthquakes actually relieve pressure along the fault zone here. They're not adding pressure to the Cascadia subduction zone. So, Maggie, again, not something that we really need to worry about because it is really, really common.
Okay, good to know. That actually soothed me. That didn't stress me out.
I'm glad to soothe you. That's what we try to do.
Okay, well, I appreciate it. Hey, thank you so much. All right, guys, still ahead. You had a lot to say about our big story the last couple of nights on teacher burnout and staffing shortages. So we're going to respond to some of your questions when the story continues. Welcome back. So this week here on The Story, we've taken an in-depth look at school staffing shortages and from, how we got to this point to possible solutions moving forward. And those stories clearly struck a chord with a lot of you, which we could see in your emails. Sean wrote, one issue that wasn't mentioned was the mandatory vaccine issue for all school employees. He continued, I believe this has had an impact on the staffing issues. So with that said, let's bring in Christine Pitawanich. Christine, you did these stories for us and you really dug into why we're facing such severe staffing shortages. So, we forwarded you some of these questions. What were you able to find out?
Well, Maggie, in regards to this first question, I'm told most educators are and have been in full support of COVID-19 measures to keep schools safe, and that includes vaccines. In fact, I'm also told that very few teachers in the Portland Association of Teachers decided not to comply with a vaccine mandate.
Okay, gotcha. Let's get to the next question, and this one from Mary. She asked, I was listening to your story about teachers. In addition to stress and inadequate pay, teachers often pay for classroom supplies out of their own pockets. And then she asked, what is being done to support teachers with those types of things? So, Christine, what did you find out about that?
Well, officials tell me not enough is being done to fully fund schools, because right now teachers, they can go ahead, apply for some grant funding. There are parent-teacher associations that can fundraise to get these school supplies, but it's just not equitable because not all schools have PTAs with funding and not all teachers have time to apply for those grants.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, on to the next question then. We appreciate it. We also heard from Bryce, who said all we ever hear is how teachers need more money, but paying teachers more money isn't going to make our kids any smarter or schools any better. So, Christine, what have you heard in your reporting that maybe addresses his points there?
Well, we know, right, that teachers often buy a lot of their own school supplies. They buy stuff for their classrooms to make it more inviting. And while Bryce says that might not make kids any smarter, I think teachers would say that it increases the likelihood of good social emotional learning and creates a safe, fun space for these kids to learn. And in addition, you know, teachers say that they're required to do a lot more these days, from participation in meetings and groups to just heightened risk with the job in terms of school safety and school violence. And I think bottom line, what I've heard is that teachers feel undervalued, and maybe more pay would help combat that and put them in a better position to be their best teaching selves when they're at school. Because, you know, I've spoken to a lot of teachers and all of them have told me they love their jobs, but at the end of the day, I think they're human too.
Yeah, they definitely are. Christine, you've done an amazing job covering this and giving them a voice, so we appreciate your insight answering these questions. Thank you so much. All right, keep sending in your questions and your comments to thestory@kgw.com. We are clearly going to finish the show with some more weird holiday decor. That's coming up next. Finally tonight, the weirdness continues. The weird holiday decor continues. Meet Christmas Bigfoot. Michelle sent him in writing, my husband and I just moved to the Mount Hood area. We love everything Bigfoot, so we adopted Harry. He has a name. Here he is, all ready, she wrote, for all the festivities. Michelle, Harry looks beautiful and beautifully weird, and we're obsessed with him too. We are asking for your weird holiday decor. You can tell Michelle obliged. We hope you do too. Everyone's got that item that kind of freaks out your relatives when they come, but you love it. You will put it out every year. Send it in, along with your questions and comments, to thestory@kgw.com, or use that hashtag #TheStoryKGW. That does it for this show. The news at 6:30 with Laurel Porter is coming up next.
This is KGW News.